I'm just gonna give you a little bit of a warning, and that warning is that I flew in from New York today, and I have had 3 hours of sleep in the last 48 hours. So some of this may not make any sense at all, and it's not you, it's me. If that's what happens, but. I was really pleased to get the invitation to speak at this event because this boundary between the arts and technology is really central to what I do. And actually, I like to look at the boundary between design and art and science as that hot spot of that place that I'm most interested in. And I want to start this talk by framing some of the intent of my talk, and I'm going to steal a little bit from the mission statement of this open source software project that I work on called Processing. And this mission statement, which was written by the Processing co-founders Casey Reese and Ben Fry, really summarizes the intent of the project, but also some of the intent of what I want to do with this talk today. So Processing seeks to ruin the careers of talented designers by tempting them away from their usual tools and into the world of programming. Similarly, the project is designed to turn engineers and computer scientists to less gainful employment as artists and designers. So my intent today is to try to get people to really change their path, and I know that can be in a really small way in some cases, but it could be in a very large way. And as Herb already mentioned, a lot of my practice centers around data. And let me just give you a quick example of a project that I worked on. This is not a New York Times project. This is a personal project. I always think that people's personal projects give them the most insight into what they're actually all about. So I'm a little bit of a science geek, and last year about this time, NASA announced this really amazing discovery. They announced that this telescope that they have orbiting the planet, it's called the Kepler telescope, had discovered just over 1,200 new planets orbiting other stars. Now, we sort of imagine in our heads that stars have planets revolving around them, but until this project, we didn't know that for sure. We didn't know that there were other planets around stars. We could guess that there were, but for all we knew, it might be a very unusual thing. And so they published this paper, which was really groundbreaking. And since it's become more and more groundbreaking, and the news gets more and more exciting with every step. Now it seems like there are, pardon my language, shitloads of planets out there. Billions and billions and billions and billions of planets, many of which are going to be maybe in the habitable range. And this is the most exciting possible news, I think, for a scientist to be involved in. And they released this paper, and you can tell how exciting it is because of how many names are on it. Like everybody wants to be cited on this paper, right? So the whole team is on this paper, and to show how exciting this news is, they developed these really amazing infographics to go along with them. So these are scientific graphics. They're meant to tell us something about this information, but really, this is only exciting to a very small group of people. Graphics like this, while they fulfill their scientific purpose, I think do a tremendous disservice to the data set itself. I think about data as having character. I think about data sets as having character. And that character we can think of as the character of a person, or the character of a material, or the character of a food. These are things that raise it above just these really dry measurements that we could make. So here's this most exciting possible data set with this tremendous character. These are faraway worlds. I mean, get all Star Trek on this, and these are like these brave new places to explore, and maybe some of humanity's next goals. And yet we're representing them with graphs like this one. And so I wanted to do something different. So I spent an afternoon and I built this visualization. And is it possible to get lights down here? Because it's going to look a lot nicer if the lights are not on in here. It's more romantic that way as well. People have been drinking. No? All right. Whoa, no. All the way around. That's less romantic. There, that's better. That's fine. So here what we see is we see all 1,200 of these planets, and you'll see it zoom in for a second, as if they were rotating around a single star. And we get some sense of how big they are. We have some orbits in place that you guys can barely see there. We have Earth's orbit and half of Earth's orbit. And then I'm going to sort them by temperature so we can see that they're all quite hot planets because they're so close to their star. And then I'm going to put that on a regular graph. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to sort it this time by size rather than by temperature. So this actually shows a lot of the same data that we saw in those graphs before, but I think it engages with the character of the data in a much more interesting way. And it was an interesting project for me for a couple of reasons. And first one is some of the reasons that I've been talking about before about it being such an exciting data set, but the second is the result of this project. So I did this for myself because I wanted to understand this data better. And a friend of mine who writes a science column, or did at the time write a science column for this website, Boing Boing, asked if he could use it online. And I said, sure, and Boing Boing's a very popular tech site, so lots of people looked at this visualization. I don't know if anybody in this room has ever had their work published in a forum like Boing Boing or Reddit or something like that. It's a terrible experience. You have to be ready for like everybody to tell you that you suck. It's all that it's going to be, like streams of how terrible it is. And this was no exception. I got like hundreds of messages telling me that I was incompetent, and this was a terrible visualization, and it didn't do the justice to the science, and it wasn't clear, and I should read Tufte, or any number of different things. And it's always disheartening. I don't like to read those things. But the next day, I got an email from that in my inbox, and I have this email. I have it saved in a special folder all by itself because it said, "Hello, Jer from the Kepler project," and it was the head of the Kepler mission who said, "Hey, we spent all day yesterday passing your visualization around the lab, and everyone loves it. And can we put it on the front page of the Kepler page?" So this was really exciting for me because I'd done something that was really just for my own curiosity, and then it ended up being used and really liked by these NASA scientists. And in April, I have an invitation to go to the Ames Research Lab in San Francisco, visit NASA, which for me, like as far as things you can check off your life list, visiting NASA is very, very high on that list. And to think that 6 hours of work on a Sunday could lead to something like that, to me is very exciting and speaks to some of the potential that this kind of new, very bizarrely structured world has, and not necessarily through corporate avenues. But this idea of the character of data is really important to my own work, and I think really also speaks to some of what we're going to I want to talk about today, and one of the reasons why we're here today, because having artists in the dialogue with designers and tech people allows us to engage more deeply with things like character, things like narrative, which are so important to the things that we work with every day, but sometimes which get lost in the everyday process of finance. So I've been working on these types of projects for a while. This is a project from 2007 called Just Landed, and what Just Landed does is it looks at people who tweet, "I just landed in London," or "Oh, I just landed in Hawaii." These tweets are, I call them the humble brag, right? Because they're people tweeting and they're trying to be all cool about it, but really they want to show off that they're traveling. And so what I did with these tweets is I plotted them 36 hours of these tweets on a map, and the idea was that I had this thought that maybe we could use this exhaust that's coming out of social networks to help model how people travel. Epidemiologists, people who study disease flow, are really interested in how people travel, and I thought, hey, maybe we could use this type of thing to model an approach like that. And then I did a more whimsical approach with that same idea where I modeled everybody in the world on Twitter saying good morning to each other. And here the people in green are saying good morning early. The people who are red are saying good morning late. And if you see the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States, you see a big difference between when people wake up in the morning. And so these pieces of software that I make are made always to investigate a question that I have. Sometimes this is a really direct question, like what do these planets look like? Sometimes it's a more abstract question. Could we use this type of data to model the way that humans travel? And really, though, we come back to this idea that every data set has some sort of central character to it that I'm looking to engage with. And I do it by building these visual tools, these visual software tools to understand these systems. Now, Herb mentioned that I'm the data artist in residence at the New York Times, which, if nothing else, tells you that the best jobs are the ones that you give yourself your own title. Because surprisingly enough, they weren't like, we need a data artist in residence. There was no job posting for it. But I've been working at the Times for about 18 months now. And I came to the Times not really to work with the Times, although of course working for the New York Times is a tremendous honor. I came to the Times because I had an opportunity to work with a person. And I wanted to bring him up in this talk specifically because I think he models a lot of the things that we want to talk about today about the boundary between arts and technology. So this is Mark Hansen. Mark is a professor of statistics at UCLA. He's also one of the world's leading media artists. He along with his partner Ben Rubin, made one of the most famous media art projects ever called Listening Post almost 10 years ago, which won the Prix Arts Electronica, which is the big New Media Arts Prize. And in his practice, more than anybody that I know, is really truly a hybrid. It's really impossible to tell. Where does the statistics research stop and where does the art begin? The edges are so blended that it's very difficult to see what's happening. So we've been working together on a project which I want to show you really quickly at the Times, which looks at a really simple question that underlies the web. And so we know that there's a thing that happens on the web. We know that block A, who we'll say is Herb over here, and block B, which is, I don't know, that guy, the blonde hair and the glasses in the back, and we know that Herb can read a story, and then later somebody in the back could read that story, and there's a connection between those two people. We call that connection sharing, right? Herb is sharing that story with the gentleman in the back. Now that's obvious that happens underneath the web, but what's amazing about it is that we still don't have a clear understanding of how that actually works. What are the sharing cascades? What are the links between one person and the other person, and what are the links between one person and many people? So we built this tool at the Times called Cascade, and Cascade is a tool that people can use to explore how a sharing event leads to other sharing events. And more specifically, how does a sharing event lead to other sharing events over time? So this is a simplified version of how the system works. And how it actually works, it looks something like this. And this is a video that I recorded last week in preparation for this of a really big story that the Times wrote in January about the working conditions at Apple's factories in China. And we see this tremendous amount of activity that stemmed from one single tweet. So here we have, I think, around 20,000 events that have stemmed from a single tweet. And what's interesting about this tool is that we can really examine the structure of that sharing. We can see what are these physical, almost architectural structures that are generated through the sharing of content. And what we're able to see with this for the first time is the real physicality of sharing underneath the web. And so we built this tool that we can use to dig through this tremendous database of content that the Times generates every day. We generate about 7,000 pieces of content every month. Every one of those pieces of content is discussed in social space. And now with this tool, we're able to examine every piece of sharing activity that happens around that social space. And this tool runs in more or less in real time. It's about a 3-minute delay between real time. We have it running on a 5-screen monitor in our R&D lab that's controlled by an iPhone controller. So at any time during the day, we can go and look at what are the stories that are influential, who's talking about them, what kinds of conversations are happening, what kinds of sharing are we seeing, and really get into these things in a real detailed way. Now, I can talk about that really analytically, but what we're actually modeling here is we're modeling conversations. We're modeling conversations. We're rebuilding little histories of conversations. And what we're actually looking at is we're sort of reconstructing little pieces of culture from our data. And data and culture are so hard to separate. Often we think about data as numbers, but those numbers are measurements of things that are often ourselves. They're often pieces of our lives. They're often actions that we take, but they could also be our neighbors. They could be our cities. They could be our parks, and so on and so on and so on. So we like to think about data as being this really cool, dry, analytical thing, but in reality, it is our lives, and just like everything, these things are steeped in, enriched, and intertwined with culture. I was reminded of this in really, really a lot of detail with a project that I worked on 2 years ago. And it started with this email. You're not meant to be able to read it, but the title is Potential Freelance Job. The most boring possible email that you can get, right? But actually turned out to be the most exciting project that I've ever worked on. I worked on this project with Jake Barton, who has a company called Local Projects in New York. Fascinating, amazing company if you have a chance to check them out if you're interested in design, especially in design for sort of the societal good. Jake and Local Projects are really the best, I think, in the world right now as far as those types of projects are concerned. But the project that we ended up working on is we worked on a tool and an algorithm to lay out the nearly 3,000 names on the 9/11 memorial that recently opened in New York City. So I don't want to talk about this in too much detail because I'm leading up to a sort of broader point. But the idea that came from the architects behind this project was that rather than lay out the names in alphabetical order or in some type of time-based order, they would lay them out in an order which to the eye looked fairly random. But underlying that order would be connections. There would be connections that they called meaningful adjacencies. So meaningful adjacencies can be very obvious. They could be brothers who died in the towers, and the next of kin want those pieces to be together. So that could be a meaningful adjacency. But of course, people lived in these towers. They had their lives there. So there were a lot of these connections that were less easily defined as sort of brothers and sisters and mothers and daughters. And so the whole memorial is kind of built with these sometimes simple, sometimes complex linkages between them. And in order to get that whole system to work, what we did is we built a software tool, again, a tool which helped us engage with this very complicated visual system and actually map out how this result was going to be needed to be laid out. And I wanted to bring up this project for a couple of reasons, and I'll get to the bigger idea first, but a smaller piece of this is something that I think gets missed a lot when we talk about data, and specifically when we talk about data visualization. Now, as Herb said, I do a lot of data visualization, and data visualization, I think, often gets thought about as a product. It's something that you produce a visualization, you publish that visualization online or on the web, or you produce a visualization tool which people use, but what we can often lose sight of is that visualization is an incredibly powerful tool to be part of our process for any project. To help us understand any system, the tools that we can learn when we teach ourselves data visualization are really important. So actually the first thing I did when I was working on this project is I produced this visualization. And so this visualization took me about half an hour to build from the data, and it immediately told me some things about the data. So these are the two towers, the south pool on the left and the north pool on the right. The names are very small and arranged around the outside. And what you see in the center is you see the lines which represent those adjacencies. So very quickly, I was able to take this thing which existed in a set of spreadsheets. It actually existed in a bunch of access tables, but existed more or less as a bunch of spreadsheets, and I was able to visually see it in a way that allowed me to understand what the problem that I had to tackle, what I was facing. And really quickly, I saw that the main part of the problem existed in this bottom half of the south pool, which is where we ended up spending so much of our time. So the projects that I work on often have a kind of a result to them, but they also usually begin as research. And research is the foundation to everything that I do. I work in the research and design group at the Times, but my practice is founded in research in all kinds of ways. I think about the artwork that I build as research. And then I also think about the research itself and the flip of the coin as being my practice. So I think about as existing as an artist who is at heart a researcher. And this is something which I think is very exciting and I think is changing the relationship between technology and the arts. And I'm going to show you a couple of projects that I think that aren't my own projects, which I think capture this in the clearest way. This is a project which won the Prix Arts Electronica 2 years ago by a group of people, including Zach Lieberman, Thea Watson, Chris Segru, and various others called iWriter. Who's familiar with iWriter? So this is a really fantastic project. Tempt, who's lying in the bed at the top right, is a graffiti artist who has Lou Gehrig's disease. And for the past number of years, he's been completely paralyzed. And the software that's available for people who are paralyzed to write is very expensive and doesn't work very well. And so what the artists who are behind this project decided to do is they decided to have a research project that would investigate ways that they could do this better and cheaper. So the iWriter project was an initiative to develop a low-cost iWriting system for people like Tempt, and they ended up being very successful. They ended up building this iWriter, which cost about $50 worth of parts compared to about $10,000 for a corporate iWriting machine. And everything was available open source. People could download and build themselves. Now this idea of sort of artists influencing technology is not a new thing. Sometimes, and I've heard of this in the discussions in small ways today, we think about artists picking up the debris of real technology and kind of using it in poetic ways. But often it happens the other way around. Here's an example. On the left, we have a project by Michael Neymark, which is called the Aspen Movie Map. And Michael Neymark was really interested in the idea of using video to reconstruct location. So he strapped a camera on top of a car, and he drove around Aspen, and he took a series of panoramic photographs. And using a touch screen, you were able to navigate Aspen, and you were able to turn around and see things as they actually were. You remember how amazing it was the first time you saw a Google Street Map? Well, Michael Neymark did this project in 1978. And if we watch this video, you can see that we forget that a lot of the things that we're engaging with today, people have been engaging with for a very long time. So this is a touch screen. He's playing this thing on the touch screen. The touch screen is interacting. He's able to look at this sort of map that's been built of Aspen in a really interactive way, the same kind of way that we work with Google Street Map. So let's not forget the value of art as research, and let's not forget that very often artists are the groundbreakers. Let's not treat them as people who can make our work become more poetic and more beautiful. And instead, let's look at artists as the R&D lab for humanity. Artists are these people who are looking very, very far forward into the future without money necessarily being a concern, which is a tremendously freeing and a tremendously powerful thing to be able to do. And I think it makes people able to look further into the future than when you're constrained by the sort of shackles of profit. I can't believe I used the phrase shackles of profit. And let's get back to data, and let's talk about this concept a little bit further, and then I'm going to wrap up. So David Foster Wallace is one of my favorite authors, an American author. It's his birthday today. He would have been 50. And in 1996, he was writing a message to his editor about his book, Infinite Jest. I don't know if anybody's read Infinite Jest, but Infinite Jest is full of footnotes to the extent that it's kind of ridiculous. And those footnotes can be many pages long, and sometimes they can have footnotes. It's this really weird intermapping of things. So the editor was asking why he was doing this. And in number 2 here, he said he wanted to mimic the information flood and data triage that he'd expect to be an even bigger part of US life 15 years from now. We think this idea of big data and the data deluge is a new thing, but David Foster Wallace was thinking about it 15 years ago. And I think, again, we get this idea that artists, in this case writers, can engage with the future and can engage with technology in ways that are very different from the ways that we think about it when we think about them inside of our own frameworks. I want to end with a project which is really a favorite of mine that we've been working on at the Times. This is a project called Open Paths. And I'll give you a little bit of background about how Open Paths came up. And I don't know if you remember this, but it was about exactly this time last year that there was a big outcry because we learned that Apple was storing location data on our iPhones. So I don't have one anymore, but on most of our iPhones, and that people, Apple could go and access that data and could see where you've been. And there was a big outcry about privacy. Well, in the lab, we sort of looked at this in a different way. We said, hey, there's like millions of iPhones, and they all have this data on them. If we could collect that data, we would have the world's largest collection of mobility data, which is extremely valuable to researchers. It's extremely valuable to people who want to use this for science. So, hey, let's engage people to collect their data, and they can donate the data. And we ended up building this tool called OpenPass, which did exactly that. You can go to OpenPass and upload your data and look at it on a map and kind of experience what's happening in your life on this map. And it's quite a fun experience to do. But what actually happened in this project, it sort of changed my mind a little bit about the way that we approach data. And this project is the sort of stem of a lot of the things that I've been talking about in the beginning of the class with this idea of character of data. Because locational data, I think, is more and more being thought of as a commodity. And we think about it as something that we sort of leave behind kind of as detritus, these points. And this is what a location point looks like, right? So this is a number, boring, right? This is the minute that I touched down at JFK Airport when I started my new life in New York. And later that evening, I had dinner at this Thai restaurant on Amsterdam Avenue, and I had this really great spicy noodle dish and a glass of this crisp Riesling, and I was so excited to start my new life. And these are points that I would have forgotten about entirely if I hadn't had the opportunity to relive them through OpenPass. This is the moment that I met my girlfriend, and so these moments of our lives that look like numbers. This is what the other people see when they store our location data, but what we see is something very different. And I think that the people who are most successful at engaging with data, artists, business people, so on and so on and so on, are going to realize that data is not what the world sees it now as being this dry resource of numbers, but instead it's this thing that's tethered to our real life. This data contains our histories in this case. And my hope is that the combination of getting artists together with designers and scientists and so on will give us a chance to put data into a human context. It'll help us remind ourselves that this data, these numbers, are part of human systems. And maybe what that will do, and this is me being utopian, is that it'll give people a better empathy for the people involved in the systems that they see data about every day, things in newspapers, about statistics about deaths and bankruptcies and so on. If we remind ourselves that numbers are tethered to things in the real world, maybe that will help us build this fundamental respect, which I think is going to be really important. One of the things that's been flowing around in my world a lot as a phrase is this idea, data is the new oil. And we've heard this over and over again. I think actually the first time I heard it was at Thinking Digital. And maybe that's true. And in fact, the Facebook with its big IPO coming up, it's going to be the biggest one in history. They're a data company. There's no doubt that data is the big thing. Now, think about how well we did with oil. And then maybe think about the value of bringing different viewpoints into this system other than purely financial ones. And I think if we can involve artists in the cultural community in these discussions right from the beginning, these things will end up being tremendously valuable for us. So again, this conversation has to involve everybody, and I think we have people from all kinds of different spheres here. And I know there's a hack day that's coming up, and those types of things are a great opportunity to experience what it's like to be able to interact with people who are outside of your little piece of this sphere. Because really, and I'm convinced that I'm not the only one who experiences this, these bright areas are much more exciting than the other areas. And if we can get in those areas, that's where the really exciting things and I think the really valuable things are going to be happening. So let me leave with two things. I can't give a presentation without a shout out again to Processing, which is the tool that I use to build all of my work. You can find Processing at processing.org, and it's an open source project. It's completely free. It's a tremendous community surrounding it. If you've ever wanted to learn how to program and you've never been brave enough, Processing is a great place to start to learn how to program. If you already program and you're looking for something more visual and more creative that'll let you talk to robots and print things out in 3D and hook up data really easily, Processing might be a place for you to have fun with programming again. Hopefully all of you are having fun with programming who are programmers, but if you're not, this might be a place for you to have fun with programming again. And then finally, I come to these events because I love Newcastle, and of course, Herb so kindly invited me. But I mainly come to meet people and have good discussions. So if you would like to carry on this discussion, I think we're having more beers, and then after I leave, you can get me through all three of these avenues. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you a couple questions. That's right.
Sure, yeah.
So first off, thanks again for a fantastic presentation.
You're welcome.
Data has character. So when you look at a data set, do you just immediately see? Is it like how like musicians will see music and they'll see color? Do you see pattern and structure and things that other people don't see?
I don't think I'm not a data savant by any means. More and more, I've been thinking about data as terrain, and thinking about a data set as a place. And in art, one of the things that I'm most excited about in sort of contemporary art is site-specific artwork. Art that is sort of made to engage with the place where it's contained. And I think the data visualization and the database projects that I'm most excited about, in some ways, are site-specific projects, where they work very well in the site of the data set that they're in. But if you were to take that thing and put it to another data set, it wouldn't work very well. We're engaged a lot in this dream of data reductionism, where we could produce a tool that would work in every data set. And the more that I thought that too when I started, but the more that I'm realizing it's kind of the opposite. This like building really bespoke tools for specific data sets to get in with their character, I think is really important and valuable.
Okay, again, going back to treating it as if it had sort of human characteristics. In the same way that you just can't...
I don't think about it, it's like in that, personally I don't think about it in that way, but I talk about texture, and I talk about, I don't personally talk about color that much, but texture and granularity and the physical aspects.
All right, cool. I'm sure there must be plenty of other places where you're running across people that are doing work similar to you. You mentioned a couple during your presentation at Decocto, and Jake Barton as well. Are there others that are kind of really well established in this kind of join between data?
I think there are a lot of people who are engaging with data from like a purely contemporary art aspect all the way to more analytical side. It's a list that I don't want to start because I would keep on going forever.
Sure.
But there's some great online places to start diving into the data world, like places like Visual Complexity, where people are doing some network visualization, but then sites like Creative Applications, where you tend to see some more art-based applications of this type of thing.
Okay, cool. And one other question before I open it is the visualization stuff you do for New York Times, where you see the sort of the life of the story. Is that something that people actually track and use? Is that like a diet? Will people go like sort of like an election night? You'll have these various ways of trying to determine who's winning where.
Ultimately, that's the goal for that project. So. It's a research project, so we're in the stage where actually it's kind of moved from being a research project, and we have a whole team of people that are building it out, and it runs in the browser now. It's really a fantastic tool. And so people are using it in the newsroom at Boston Globe. We're starting, the New York Times newsroom is a very, they're kind of a slow-moving object. So we need to show them how it's going to really help them, and I think by doing that, then it'll make sense.
Cool. Okay, great.